Happy politics and welcome to What I Know. Just admit it. It's okay to admit it to your friends and your colleagues. This is your favorite BC politics podcast / YouTube show. It's just true. Admit it. It's once it's out there in the open, you'll feel better.
We're
This,
the
of course,
mash.
as you know,
We're the
what's that?
mash. We're the mash of the BC Poly podcast sphere.
We
That's
are
right.
the MASH of the BC Poly
The
podcast,
best.
one of the longest running podcast on the Orca anyway. This is BC Poly Hot Stove, as you probably well know. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, and I'm joined in a socially distant manner by...
It is Jordan Bateman, VP Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association. Let me start first by disavowing Aaron Rodgers' view on immunization and vaccinations. It was a hard week to be a Packer fan. I'm not going to lie to you, but
I admit I was going to save this little tidbit to the end, but yeah, that must have been a difficult pill to swallow.
the old man will be back on Sunday. Russell Wilson, his broken finger, will be back on Sunday. Both of them playing at Lambeau. And just so you're aware, in the Packer-Seahawks rivalry, the Seahawks have not won at Lambeau since 1999. And Packers-Seahawks, the home team has won the last 9 games. So if you're betting, bet accordingly.
Yes, if you're a Packers fan, it's a tough pill to swallow. Not as tough as the pills of horse medicine that your quarterback has been swallowing.
All right. I thought he was a future Denver Bronco legend. I don't know what you're talking about.
He's, you know what? That's not even true. We'd still take him. That's the sad thing. Oh, well. Anyway, so we've just lost some of our audience already. It's COVID related. It's not just sports. It's current events. Oh, whatever. We should also start our podcast today with, I'm sure I speak for you, best wishes to the Premier, John Horgan. We learned this week that the growth in his throat is indeed cancerous, but the prognosis is good. Apparently, he's in good spirits and very optimistic. He is, the word I got was peppering his staff with texts and emails, which is good. Means he's still engaged, and he's due for treatment. And BC, we have literally the best cancer outcomes on the planet, and so best wishes to the Premier.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, John Horgan overcame bladder cancer, I think 15, 20 years ago. I never bought into Premier Dad. He's a Premier fighter. So, he'll fight this. I've no doubt he'll come back fit and healthy and ready to go. But John, don't be afraid to rest in this period. There's no reason why. Pepper your staff with questions, but, don't be afraid to rest and take care of yourself, because that is the most important thing is, you'll be Premier, whether it's another year or 4 years or 14 years. The most important thing is that you're fit and healthy for retirement with Ellie and your kids. That's the single most important thing you can do. So get better soon, Premier Horgan. On behalf of BC Liberals, we don't really look forward to you being back in the House, torturing us, but we hope we certainly hope to see you there.
Absolutely. I think everyone can agree on that. One thing that John Horgan missed last week was probably, I don't know if you'd agree with me, Jordan, it was probably the worst week the government has had in terms of question periods, and probably, I would argue, the best week that the opposition BC Liberals have had. They often, we've talked about this before. One of the best methods in question period is not to say, I, the MLA for myself in my living room, I have a problem with this policy for these reasons. Yeah, they can dismiss that. Of course, you're paid to say that. You're literally the opposition. When you say, listen, I've got a quote here from Jane Smith, who's very concerned about the things you're doing, and this is what Jane has to say. And the next person gets up and says, well, this is what John Smith has to say. And it's much harder to dismiss concerns, and we're talking about autism supports and changes there, when they're coming from real people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we talked about this last week, how parents of children with autism, generally speaking, are among the most passionate advocates and in BC. They work hard because they've had to scrap and claw for every single support that their child is entitled to. And so they're well organized, they understand how to affect government, and they're going after it. And you're right, the Liberals did a good job of, reading questions from families. And I'm sure we'll talk about Nick Simons in a moment, but it just makes it so difficult. I was sitting and watching question period, and I'm like, Mitzi Dean seems like she's the minister responsible. She seems reasonable, and she sounds reasonable in the House. The problem is her line of argument is, well, this is going to be better for everyone, and we've consulted widely. And then the Liberals would trot out another name. Well, Mrs. Smith from such and such says, you didn't consult and they don't want this. And so it really erodes her argument quickly that this is somehow a magic solution that's going to make all of these parents, families with children with autism happy. Yeah, it was a good week for the Liberals in that case. I don't think this is going to go away. I think the NDP at some point, you think they're going to have to back down on this somewhere along the line, but still no signs that they are.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Nick Simons thing, and what led to that was on the last day of reading questions from parents, from families, one of the ones led with, I was a parent who was watching these questions get asked, my own question get asked earlier this week, and I saw the government dismissing and sneering and jeering and heckling, and I took that personally. First of all, don't sneer and heckle questions about autism supports. That's the first mistake.
Yeah.
The second one is when you're reading when the opposition is reading a question from a person, a real person who is not the asking MLA, you can bet that they're watching with keen interest, and they will take whatever dismissive heckling or jeering that you are directing to the person asking the question. They'll take that personally, and that's exactly what happened in this case. You can tell. I mean, this is I'm going to say it again, a hard pill to swallow for the NDP. They're not used to getting punched in the face over social issues like this. The word clawback must particularly sting for them because it was one they wielded so effectively. Yep. And so at the end of Thursday's question period, Nick Simons, who's the Minister of Poverty Reduction, I believe, handed a note, which is not unusual in the legislature, to Jackie Taggart and said, gave her the definition of sanctimony and told her to have a nice week, a nice break week. Jackie did not take that well and posted it on Twitter. I wrote a little bit about it. Look, for those who said it was much ado about nothing, the minister himself apologized twice. He himself called it an arrogant and intemperate note. It was both of those things. I agree with the minister. He shouldn't have done it.
Yeah. Look, I think, Nick being a straight talking guy, I would probably tell you Nick was being a dick. Like, that is not appropriate way to handle these situations. Jackie Taggart, if I recall correctly, one of the reasons she got involved in politics was on issues like this, specifically autism.
That's she told me when I called her about this story. I didn't know this. She got into politics 20 years ago or so, running for school board because she'd heard about a child with autism who was being kept out of class. She was enraged. Yeah,
and so when this is the hook that brought you into politics, you're going to take these issues very seriously. And again, this wasn't Jackie Taggart's question. She's not sitting there saying, I have a child with like this, and you're doing wrong because of this. No, she was reading questions from actual parents. And yeah, Nick Simons had to apologize, and that's not a great look for the government. It shows, the interesting thing about governments is there's an arrogance that comes so quickly. And this one has really progressed fast. Let's bear in mind, we're a year and a month, 13 months since the last election, where they actually formed their majority government. Mm-hmm. And there's this growing arrogance among them that, should be, frankly, I think, troubling for the premier and the leadership of the party, because how do you act like you're the voice of the common person, the little people, the people who've been left out of government, the people who aren't being supported properly, and then you have this kind of arrogance going on. Like it runs counter to it. That is a bad look for a government. And, this is one issue of many that will crop up. Government will be heavy-handed again and again. And these things will kind of stack on top of each other until the media and the public narrative is like, boy, these guys are out of touch. They don't understand people like me. And once governments get there, they get defeated. So, this issue alone won't defeat the provincial government, won't defeat the NDP government. But this issue creating the sense that you're out of touch and arrogant, that can certainly do it.
Yeah, well, single issues rarely defeat a government, don't they? You're right. These things tend to pile up and they create a narrative. And I think, when you're looking at things like question period day by day, there is a tendency to say, well, is there that knockout blow that's going to knock the government down? That never happens. No. Almost never. And we keep looking for them. It's the same with debates. Who scored the knockout blow? Again, it's incredibly rare. Yeah. But it's all about, base hits, not home runs. And I think by any reasonable definition, I think the government would agree that last week was not a good week for them.
Yeah, exactly. And most of those knockout blows, you don't actually, in the moment, you don't think of them as knockout blows. We,
Yeah.
we talk a lot about Gordon Wilson in 1991, and this is why nothing gets done in British Columbia. That, at the moment, kind of passed over people.
Yeah.
And then later on, it became the narrative that that was the big turning point in the election. No, the turning point in that election was he actually got into the debate. Like, it wasn't that necessarily what he said in the debate. It's the fact he actually got into the debate, which was a big change and introduced him. So, you know, and I put that in this context. You know, 3 years from now, if the NDP have this reputation as arrogant and out of touch, yeah, you may look back at this issue and be like, you know, that is where it started. That was a knockout blow. But in the moment, frankly, it's not the Liberals' job at this moment. Their job is to continue to bring the concerns of those parents. My good friends, Sam and Lana, they have a son on the spectrum. Brilliant kid. But they've worked very hard to get a diagnosis. They had to work very hard to get the funding. They go to a small school in Abbotsford. They have to work very hard to make sure that the SEAs, Special Education Assistants, I believe they're called, is actually assigned to him, even though because the funding is attached to him, and but there's lots of needs within a school, so those people can be kind of stretched apart. We don't have enough SEAs in the province, so this is a family that has become very good at self-advocating to make sure that their son is taken care of. And they've done an interview. They've wrote a letter to government and CC'd the media. They've done an interview on CBC TV, and this is not how they want to spend their time, but it's how they have to spend their time in order to do what's right by their son. And you take that and you multiply it by 10,000 families across BC, or 20,000, or whatever the number is, and that will continue to be an unfolding narrative in the weeks and months to come. And if the NDP remain close-fisted and say, nope, we're going to do it this way, every time one of those supports gets stripped away, every time there is a failure of the system, and there will be, because it's a bureaucratic system and there are failures, they will be held accountable for it. So it'll be very interesting to see how this goes. It reminds me so much of the End the Clawback stuff with the bus passes, which, by the way, the bus passes, you weren't actually taking funding away from anyone, but the branding was more important than the actual issue, and it became a big deal. So, yeah, the Liberals have some runway there. Their job is to make sure it's constantly the parents at the forefront. I've heard, I saw somewhere that there might even be a rally of these families in a couple weeks before the legislature rises for good for the year. That won't be great for the NDP. And the Liberals in that case, should be there smiling and nodding and agreeing with them, but let the parents tell their stories. Don't clutter it with politicians.
No, I agree. I mean, you're quite right to bring up the bus pass clawback, because, I mean, there's a lot of similarities, a lot of parallels. It was sort of more a reallocating of money so it can be better invested, but it doesn't matter. Once you're defending a clawback, you've already lost. And the smart thing to do is just say, yeah, we've heard the feedback and we're gonna reverse course. And it probably, the issue wouldn't, I don't want to say died, but it wouldn't have been as bad as it was. And this does kind of have that same kind of sense. They're explaining, well, it's not a clawback. Sure, you'll be getting less and you won't be getting this, but you're getting this other thing. It doesn't matter. You've already lost.
Yeah. So many times governments go out the way they came in, right? Like, it's an interesting historical cycle. And, imagine a government coming in because the old one is arrogant, not in touch with common people, and clawing back things from single moms and blah, blah, all this stuff. And then now they find themselves in power, and they're doing the same, if not worse, to families with children with autism. Governments go out the same way they came in, and I always find it intriguing to see that arc of history repeated over and over and over again.
As Rob Shaw likes to say, BC politics is a flat circle.
Yes.
The other story that we should talk about this week is one that I found interesting only because I will admit to you going in, I entered the story knowing nothing about it, and that is BC is ending the mink farming industry. I guess I was dimly aware that we had mink farms in BC. It's not something that I have devoted much time learning about, but the point here is it's not being ended because of concerns about mink farming per se, but minks have been particularly susceptible to COVID-19. and therefore passing it on to people. And so the vast majority of mink in the province are already scheduled to be euthanized. The province announced sort of quietly and abruptly that, oh, by the way, they're also closing all the mink farms permanently. Now, you may support that decision, you may not support that decision, but if you're a mink farmer, there's a chance you heard about it in the media, and that's not ideal.
No, so there's 9 mink farms, is my understanding, across British Columbia. It's about a $15 million a year industry and employs about 200 people. So it's not forestry. It's not, a giant industry. But for those 9 farms and those 200 people and that 50, this is their livelihood, their investment. They've put their whole, time, effort, money. This is their family business. There's no mink farming conglomerate out there that's making millions on mink farming, right? No, these are families who have done this sometimes for generations. Look, whether you agree with fur farming or you don't, and there's lots of very valid arguments against fur farming. It's a legal industry that families have invested in, and just like that, the government decides they're going to snuff it out. And what's even more galling to me is the government snuffs it out without the minister having the courage to pick up the phone and call the 9 families involved and say, listen, we're doing this. Some flunky in the Ministry of Ag will handle it, rather than the minister herself. Instead, she goes out there with Dr. Bonnie riding shotgun and announces the closure of an entire industry, a legal industry, mind you, with very little notice. Apparently, according to Von Palmer's piece, they got a call from officials in the Ministry of Agriculture maybe 45 minutes before she went out there. That is really shocking to me. And I think for a lot of people, you're like, what if that was my industry that was snuffed out? But remember, this is the same government that did that to restaurants on, was it New Year's Eve? Mm-hmm. They were planning big parties, everything was set, and then boom, gone. And no consultation, everyone left reeling in shock. There's a sense, I think, that the NDP have been wanting to get rid of fur farming for a long time, and COVID feels like a very convenient excuse to do it. Whether that's true or not, I don't know about the wisdom of having Dr. Bonnie there. If you want Dr. Bonnie to be a non-political figure providing medical advice, I'm not sure snuffing out a portion of 9 farms is a great way to kind of do that. Mink farming, I think at the beginning there was an outbreak at one. It seems to have been fairly safe since. We haven't heard about big outbreaks at mink farms since.
Yeah.
So all these things kind of add up together, and you're left going, what other industries are there out there that the government doesn't like ideologically, that if they have an opportunity to snuff out with no consultation, no notice, will they do?
Yeah.
That's got to be concerning if you're an investor in BC.
Absolutely. And if you're watching or listening to this and your reaction is, well, I don't like mink farms, I don't want them, yeah. That's fine.
Yeah.
But if that's a completely legitimate standpoint, and I think that most people suspect that is why the NDP is moving to close mink farms, because mink farming. And again, that's fine, but say so. Dressing it up, I think you're right. It does some damage to say that it's not a temporary measure because of COVID. A lot of things have been closed temporarily because of COVID. This is as you say, shuttering an entire industry. But using Dr. Bonnie Henry, the face of the province's COVID response, as kind of dressing for it, that's the part that really struck me about this story. It wasn't even so much that it's happening, terrible though that is to the industry and the people involved. It's more the reason why just doesn't sit right. It's just say you're closing it because BC is moving in the 21st century or whatever it is you want to say. Just say we're making the choice. They kind of tried it with fish farms.
Yeah.
They've already gone there. Why not do it again with mink farming?
Yeah, and it's troubling. There was consultation, but really closure was never on the table in this pre-consultation. And now they've given them until the 15th of November to reply, these 9 families. Well, what are they going to say? This really sucks. We
disagree with your decision to end our livelihood.
Yes.
I don't know.
You're right. It's problematic. And look, I assume that there's some veterinarian scientists out there working on COVID vaccines for animals. Because remember at the beginning there was concerns that dogs and cats could get it too, and would they be passing it on? And so I assume that there's some work being done on animal vaccines, you inoculate animals against all sorts of things, right? Is this not a thing? Maybe it's not, in which case I stand corrected. But yeah, I just don't like the idea that on a political whim, you can snuff out an entire industry without even picking up the phone to call them. Like that
Yeah.
that seems really bad to me.
And using the pandemic as a rationale to shutter something permanently,
Yeah.
It's going to make it harder the next time there is a major COVID closure that's required. Hopefully there are none, but it's possible there will. Our weekly segment on what's new in the BC Liberal leadership race probably deserves its own sidebar this week because, I mean, there is some news in the BC Liberal leadership race, but the biggest news is probably that we might have to start talking about the BC Conservative leadership race.
Well, not to get on their feet again, but God bless No Context BC Gov for the amazing quotes they pull out of Aaron Gunn calling the BC Conservatives a Mickey Mouse party. You know, somewhere somewhere the New Jersey Devils and Wayne Gretzky would be proud. So Aaron Gunn. So Aaron Gunn. Aaron Gunn.
That's the clip. No Context BC Gov right there.
What do I say? Look, in politics, when you run for something, you generally have to have enough of an ego to believe that you can actually affect change. And,
of course,
you know, most shrinking violets aren't going to do it. You know, you have to have a certain confidence. Aaron Gunn has confidence in spades. So,
Indeed.
you know, my problem is, like last week, my advice to Aaron Gunn was like, look, get behind Ellis Ross, make him the leader of the party, and be his number one guy. And the moment Ellis Ross becomes leader, guess what? LEOC, the Liberal Leadership Electoral Organizing Committee, becomes irrelevant. Ellis appoints him president of the party. Like, you know, there's all sorts of things that happen and things fall into place. And all of a sudden, you're there, you're supporting Ellis Ross. And if Ellis wins in 2023 or whatever the next election is, or 2024, 25, whatever, chances are you're helping him and you've run somewhere and you've gotten elected and you're in cabinet. If he loses and he's bounced out, hey, you've got a big, powerful platform in which to go and run for leadership again. But get into the party and start building the networks you need within the power structure itself. He chose to go the other way. He chose to Max Bernier his way through this. And instead, you know, he goes off and he's decided he's going to form his own political movement. And nudge, nudge, wink, wink, I'm going to talk to the BC Conservatives. Well, a few problems.
They'll probably take your call.
Yeah, they probably, yes. I'm not sure who will take your call, but they will. A few problems with that. Number one, you know, what happens if Ellis Ross is the next leader of the BC Liberal Party? You've already come out and said he's a good man and you respect him and you wish him the best and he's certainly supported you. So Ellis Ross wins that. You're really going to run against Ellis Ross? Like, what are you doing? That doesn't make any sense at all. That's not who you are. You're running against your own principles. Like, what do you think about this for a second? But, you know, there's a rush of immediacy and urgency sometimes in politics where you think, oh, I got to capitalize on this, you know, outrage that there is over this. No, like, you kind of waited 3 months, see what happens in the leadership race to the BC Liberals, and if they tack in a direction you don't like, then you go off and you say, you know what, thank God they didn't let me in because I would have changed that party and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Like, that was your natural bridge out. But I just sit here and go, Ellis Ross has a good chance. Like, I firmly believe it's either Falcon or Ross who's going to win this leadership race. And, you know, if it's Ross, you've already tacitly endorsed him. Like, what are you doing? So I find it you know, Aaron's 31 or 32. You got to realize that sometimes politics is a long game. And, you know, putting aside your own personal axes for 3 months to see what happens probably would have been a better way to go. Instead, I fear that he'll go off and Max Bernier this. Max Bernier is not affecting change in Canada.
No.
It's a complete vanity project for him. The party structure is basically him deciding what to do and finding ways to raise money in order to pay him. That's not a model for a sustainable political movement. And already, you know, the PPC, I saw some federal polling, and, you know, the Liberals are up, the Conservatives are down, the NDP are up, and the PPC are flat. And, you know, that feels right, right? Like,
yeah.
So, you know, I just don't understand this kind of rash thinking when, again, Ellis may end up being the leader, and then you've sort of painted yourself into a corner.
I mean, I agree with every word you just said. We said a couple weeks ago that the best bet for Aaron Gunn, in our opinion, is to sit back, see what happens, and he's chosen not to do that. I the history of there are people in Canadian politics who have run for leadership of a party, or in Aaron Gunn's case, tried to run for leadership of a party, only to run against that party in the subsequent election, and they always get trounced because that's what people just see it as. Is they see it as, well, now it's just revenge. You're not doing this for me. You're doing this to prove a point, and it's that no one votes for that. Why would they?
Am I going to reference Gordon Wilson twice in the same podcast? This is why you watch BC Poly Hot Stove. That friggin' Capital Direct and Unspun. They're never mentioning Gordon Wilson once, let alone twice in the same podcast.
That's true.
But here I am. Wilson and Tayaji went off, and was it the really ridiculously named PDA? Was that the name of their party? I think
it was the Progressive Democratic Alliance.
But
the PDA.
PDA, and after all this shenanigans,
can't make this stuff up.
No, God, I love BC politics. No wonder Von Palmer is never going to retire. Where do you get this stuff? Like, only in British Columbia, people. Anyways, the PDA was one of those examples, and they quickly fizzled out. And there's lots. You're exactly right. There's lots of examples. John Van Dongen at one point left the BC Liberals, joined the BC Conservatives, and
my favorite example is from Alberta. Nancy Betkowski was her name. She ran for. She was the favorite to succeed Don Getty as the PC leader. That, of course, ended up being Ralph Klein. She was so damaged by this, so hurt. And angry, which is fair. She ran for leader of the Alberta Liberals and won that, and then got absolutely crushed in the subsequent election because people couldn't make out why she was taking over the party that she had intended to crush herself. And the best part is, in the interim, she had gotten married and changed her last name to Macbeth, and you just can't make this stuff up. That's chef's kiss stuff right there.
Chef's kiss to the political world, folks. This is why people like Maclean and I broadcast every week, because, you can't, you're right, you can't make that sort of thing up. If you did it on a TV show, people would be like, ugh.
Too on the nose. Macbeth, really? Yeah. Too on the nose.
Too obvious.
That's what happened.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So, I'm disappointed in Aaron. I would have counseled patience and getting behind Ellis, but... Because, frankly, you get behind Ellis, and if he loses, Ellis may go with you. Like, who knows, right? Like, I don't know. You don't know. You don't know how depends how nasty this thing gets, and parties split all the time over leaderships. Which, by the way, is why there is and even before his diagnosis, the press gallery and many observers were convinced that Horgan wouldn't run again for another term. The more I watch what's unfolding in their caucus between what I'll call Steele and Sierra Club, that kind of lefty, the Sierra Club representing the kind of lefty environmentalists, shut everything down, kill oil and gas, stop pipelines, don't do anything, killed forestry, whatever, kill mink farms. That group, and Steele, which isn't just Steele, but is the working folks, blue collar unionized workers that the NDP have relied on for so long. There's a schism, and it's not getting closer. It's getting further apart. We saw it with the forestry announcement, where who would have thought steelworkers who gave millions of dollars to the NDP over the years, and workers and candidates, and resourced them completely, and a POCO mayor, and all these things that they've given the NDP. And now, there's a cleave there in that. And that's why I do wonder if John Horgan, health permitting, will run again, simply because very few others in that party can hold these two poles together in the way that he can and has up until this point. So there you go. That's my I'm not an expert on NDP internal politics, I should just say. I don't got a lot of sources in the NDP underworld telling you what's going on. If you would like to be, DM me at Jordan Bateman on Twitter. My DMs are open. Just kidding, they're not. I don't want to hear from people. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you do. You totally do. Are you kidding? You'd love that stuff.
Yeah. No, it's in there. But sometimes people are mean. So if you're a mean DMer, I just delete you. It blocks you.
That's true. Yeah.
I don't have to deal with that. But if you're a nice DMer who has interesting stories, I'd love to hear it. But that's my feeling as to what's kind of going on in NDP caucus. So all that to say, parties split all the time. There's factions that arise. And that's why I would have liked to have seen Aaron stick in with the BC Liberals and see if the wheel would have turned on him.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. And and I do talk to people in the NDP, and your suspicions are correct. I mean, This is true of every government with a big party. There are, factions and coalitions and diverging sort of interest groups represented within the caucus and cabinet table, and that's normal. But in the NDP, we tend to focus on that on the BC Liberal side because it is explicitly a coalition of two parties. But you're right, in the NDP, and I think that is. We're going to see a sort of larger shift. This is me talking in broad predictive terms here, in Canadian politics, where exactly what you describe, the blue collar sort of, whether workers or whether they're unionized or not, they are, I believe, increasingly going to become detached from an increasingly urban, progressive, extremely online left. And you've seen like Aaron O'Toole making a play for unions in the last election. It didn't work out for him, but I think they're sort of starting to see what's there. Because, I mean, whether you're unionized or not unionized, if you're a plumber or a pipe fitter, eventually, I think a lot of the stuff you see from a modern left party, you're not. The average, how do I put this in a way that's not going to get me in trouble? The average plumber does not care about hashtag politics, does not care about, what's being protested on the lawn that day. And that detachment is going to become more pronounced, I feel, as the years go on, both in BC and Canada as a whole.
Yeah, not just the average plumber doesn't care. The average human doesn't care what's being protested on the lawn most days. So you're exactly right. The political scenes are always shifting. This is why people who are like, oh, the BC Liberals will never win again, it's all over, blah. I'm like, pendulums shift back and forth. Sometimes you just have to wait until the right time.
I mean, the NDP thought the 2017 election that they won was unwinnable as little as a year out. There was not much enthusiasm in that leadership race for them because they thought it was an 8-year project. Didn't turn out that way. Yeah. And so, yeah, you're right. You never know what's going to happen around the corner.
Exactly. All right. There we go. I think we're done.
All right. And we did the sports stuff off the top. So, we don't even have to come back to that.
Well, the BC Lions just keep losing and losing and losing. Speaking of pendulums that need to swing back, the Lions need to win.
Oh, yeah. No, that season's spinning out of control, unfortunately for them.
It could be worse for Maclean. They could be the Edmonton Elks.
Yeah, things are never going to be that bad. I'm not going to lie. I'm enjoying every bit of their misery this year. But I hope they're back sort of healthy next year. And I hope the crowds come back because that's hard to see.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, until next week, he's Jordan Bateman. I'm Maclean K. Happy politics.